would be like their Thursday night.
but there's a Whole Foods there. For now,
Good evening, everyone. We'll open the meeting.
Mayor, council, members of the public, welcome this evening. This is the city's annual Truth and Taxation hearing. This is our public informational meeting regarding the 2019 budget and property tax levy. With me tonight is the city's finance director, Andy Reed. We're going to spend some time going through the proposed budget, tax levy. Then there'll be some opportunity to ask some questions, hopefully be able to answer some questions. Usually this meeting lasts anywhere from about 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes, depending on how many questions we get and how long it takes for me to go through the presentation. So this is the agenda for this evening. These are the items that we'll be touching on. We'll be touching on the budget process to date, just some general information regarding the Truth and Taxation hearing, why we have it, what the purpose of it is. We'll take a look at how we compare to some other areas. We'll touch a little bit more in detail on Property Taxation 101. And then we'll go into more detail on the levy, the general fund budget, enterprise fund budgets, our capital improvement plan and debt management plan, and then any other next steps that may come up. Budget process to date, this is technically our 5th public meeting regarding the proposed budget. Our first work session took place on May 22nd with the last one taking place on November 13th. City Council adopted the preliminary budget and tax levy in September. The statements you received in the mail are based off of that. Those notices that went out, obviously probably last month. So what is the Truth and Taxation hearing? What's the purpose of it? The main purpose of the Truth and Taxation hearing is to enhance the public participation in the property tax system by allowing a public forum to discuss the budget, the proposed tax levy, to go over any increases or decreases in the budget and tax levy, and obviously to hear public comments and questions on that budget and tax levy. So tonight is the Truth and Taxation hearing. If there is a need, there'll be a continuation hearing at our next council meeting, which is next Tuesday, December 11th. The final budget and tax levy will be adopted at the December 27th council meeting. It needs to be finalized and certified to the county by December 28th. Just kind of gives you a timeline on that. So now I'm going to get into some of the general information regarding Truth and Taxation. This might answer, I have a feeling, a question on why some of you are here tonight. But generally, the data that you see has been presented by the City of Hutchinson, unless noted. If there's some other data, I'll try to provide the source within the slides that we're handing out. Sorry, I think we made 15 copies, so if you want a copy of this, let me know. We can get you a copy after the meeting. Just a reminder, and this is where I have a feeling a lot of questions might come out. Tonight we discussed the city's share of your 2019 proposed tax bill, not property values. And I say that because this is my 17th year of doing Truth and Taxation hearings, and I think for all 17 years people show up to talk about property valuations, and I'll explain there's an opportunity for when that takes place and where you can do that. So I usually like to put up the property tax cycle. We're obviously in December, but your property values that get sent to you usually in March. The hearing for the valuation is done in April or May. That's called the Board of Equalization. That is the time where a group gets together. Usually it used to be the City Council. They have since passed it on to the County Board and the County Assessor. That takes place in March, April, May time period. Usually get a notice probably February, March on the valuations. So I just wanted to share that tonight. We're not talking about property values. I know we'll probably have some questions on that, but I do want to make sure that gets out there. It's really talking about numbers. So it's the proposed budget and the proposed tax levy. But with that being said, knowing that people do show up to ask questions about property value, I'll try to give you a little bit of background so to hopefully help you out when you do want to go talk with the Board of Equalization. I would encourage you, if you have some concerns on your valuations, to try to meet with the county assessor. County assessor is who establishes the values for property within the city of Hutchinson and most of McLeod County. But in regards to valuations, in Minnesota, the market value of property is determined by January 2nd of the year prior to the year in which taxes on that property are due. So this is where it gets confusing. In other words, market values for taxes payable in 2019 were set in January of 2018. So property values on statements recently received are based off of home sales from October of 2016 to September of 2017. Now, I shouldn't say just home sales, but property sales. So both home, commercial, industrial, apartment, vacant lots. So property owners receive a new notice of market values from the assessor in March, April of 2019. Questions on valuation should be addressed at the open book meeting in May or June. You should get a notice on when that open book meeting is. So first off, the preliminary tax levy that we'll be diving into, that was set in September, and the property tax effect statement that you got in the mail showed a city tax increase of 3.1%. Back in September, that had a preliminary balanced. We had a preliminary balanced budget. The revised budget that we're going to be discussing tonight includes a 2.8% tax levy increase, along with a balanced budget. So since September, the city has adjusted revenue projections and eliminated roughly just over $46,000 in expenses from the preliminary budget. There is a possibility that that number could go down again before the final budget is approved at the end of December. We're still waiting on some open enrollment numbers that are coming in for health insurance. So a couple things that I'd like to touch on is where does Hutchinson stand in regards to the rest of the county, and I also like to try to highlight where do we stand in regards to regional centers, and I'll touch on that a little bit. Our 2018 average city tax rate ranked second lowest in McLeod County. Our tax rate is roughly 71.14% in 2018. The preliminary tax levy that went out in September would have lowered that tax rate to 67.32%. And what we're discussing tonight, our estimate is that it's proposed to be lowered to 67.10%. Usually I try to show how we rank in regards to our outstate regional centers. There's 19 of us. However, the state has gone through a transition, and so those numbers aren't available for 16 and 17. Generally speaking, we are, when it comes to tax rate, there's 19 regional centers. We're usually about the 4th or 5th highest when it comes to tax rates. Just a couple other things to consider. When looking at those 19 regional centers, we have the lowest percent of population below the poverty level. Our median household income is the 3rd highest of all outstate regional centers. Our median home value is the 7th highest, and our local government aid payment is the 3rd lowest out of all those outstate regional centers. Recently, the state released a statewide proposed property tax increase for cities, and the average property tax increase is 6.2%. When you factor into consideration school districts, counties, townships, the overall property tax impact is right around 5.7% of what all the taxing districts are proposing at the preliminary level here for 2019. One of the things that we started keeping track of, starting actually earlier this year, is the price of government for the city of Hutchinson. The state uses this when they present their numbers, and it's a formula that takes into account the city's personal income divided by the amount of property taxes we collect from a city standpoint, along with permit fees that we collect. For 2017, obviously 2018 numbers aren't out there yet, but for 2017, we're roughly about 2.9%. So roughly for every dollar being spent, 3 cents is going to the local government here in Hutchinson. Compare that to some of our other regional centers. I've got up there Albert Lee, Alexandria, Austin, Bemidji, Brainerd, Fairmont, Faribault. This is based off of 2016 numbers. We were at 3%. Kind of puts us right in the middle of the pack towards the higher end. Fairmont's at 3.5%, Marshall's at 3.7%, New Ulm's at 3%. That just kind of gives you a comparison on where do we sit compared to some of the other regional centers that we compare ourselves to within the state. So I'm going to dive a little bit more now into some details on how do we come up with a tax dollar amount that you receive on your property tax statement. League of Minnesota Cities several years ago put this document out there that there's actually 14 different reasons that may vary from year to year on why property taxes may go up for an individual property taxpayer. I highlighted some of the ones that really affect us. That's the city's budget and levy may change. That's what we're talking about tonight. There may be a special assessment added to your property tax bill. And then there's special districts, budget and levy that may change. In our case, that's something like our HRA and our EDA, which has taxing authority within the city of Hutchinson. So I'm going to do my best. For those of us that live in Minnesota, property tax system is not easy to explain. There's many different tentacles that are part of it, so I'm going to do my best to give you a summary. So when we look at the property tax that you pay on your home bill, there's really 5 components that play into that. One is the local property tax levies that are set. That's your city, school district, county, maybe your town board, depending on where you live, which create your local property tax rate. The state has a property tax classification rate as well that ranges from 0.25% to 2%. And I'll dive in that. Those that are income producing have a higher tax classification than your residential homes. So those of you that own a commercial business, the way the state has established their tax system, in general, you're going to pay more property taxes than a home in town. That's established by the state. Property values play into a part of what your property tax levy is. As I noted previously, that's set by the county assessor. There may be tax credits involved. Only certain properties usually get that. And then there's the state general tax, which is set by the state, and that's assigned mainly to commercial and industrial properties. So as I dive into this a little bit more and hopefully try to explain it to especially those that maybe own a business, a commercial industrial property in Hutchinson that has the same value as a residential, this is for comparison purposes, that has the same value as a residential property will pay more in property taxes than that residential property. Not because of something the city did, but because of the way the state has designated or designed our state property tax system. So commercial industrial properties have a disadvantage when it comes to our property tax system as designated or designed by the state of Minnesota. The state has a philosophy that those properties that generate revenue should pay a higher percent of property taxes. They are assigned a higher tax classification, they're less likely to get tax credits, and they have to pay the state general tax, which most residential properties don't have to pay. The biggest impact the city has on commercial properties when it comes to local property tax is our local tax levy, which is part of what we're discussing here tonight. However, that's the same for residential properties as well. So the higher the levy, the bigger the portion of the pie a commercial and residential property has to pay, which is part of the reason that we have this public hearing tonight. So if you're at home and you're trying to calculate what's my city portion, now the county does a pretty good job of separating city, county, and state, but as we look at, it's our role to establish the tax rate, and that's based off of what we're asking to collect from the public, and then based off of tax capacity. And so Hutchinson's property tax rate is set by taking the city's tax levy and dividing it by its total tax capacity. And this is getting into the geeky budget side of what we do. But tax capacity is determined by multiplying a property's market value by its classification rate. If you remember in the previous slide, depending on what your property is classified as, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, the state's going to give you a classification rate, anywhere from 0.25 to 2%. And we've got a graph that we can show you that might give you an idea on where your property falls at. But they do that for every single property in town. So when that calculation's done, that's where you come up with the total tax capacity. Now if you look back at last year, our total tax capacity, or this is for 2018, our total tax capacity was closer to 10 million. So that's increased by almost $900,000. And so you ask, okay, if you're raising the tax levy by 2.8 to 3.1%, how is the property tax rate going down? It's because we're seeing the property value expand greater or faster than how high we're raising or how fast we're raising our tax levy. So I put this up here. Obviously, I handed out the spreadsheet so you can do the calculation for you at home. But the best way to figure out what your local portion is to take your home value. There's an exclusion. I'll touch on that after this slide. Times your classification rate, times your city tax rate. So based off of what the city is proposing for 2019, a home that's valued at $160,000 is roughly going to pay $920 in city taxes. That doesn't include the school, doesn't include the county, and doesn't include any state. That same $160,000 home would pay about $1,019 in Glencoe and about $1,049 in Homestead, just for comparison purposes. So when we entered into the property tax, or the budget preparation and the property tax preparation season, we really looked at 4 different options, anything from a 0% increase to a 4.5% increase within our general fund. What's being discussed tonight and what's been set on in the preliminary stages has been a 4% increase to our general fund levy and a 0% increase to our debt levy, which is a total overall tax levy increase of 2.8%. I touched on this just briefly about the market homestead exclusion. This was a state program that was done, that started, I believe, in 2011, 2012. You may recall that you used to have a credit that you used to get, and this is the state's version of doing property tax relief throughout the entire state. And so what happens with this exclusion now is that if your home's valued at $144,000, the state has a calculation in place that actually lowers the taxable amount of that property. So we've got some examples up here. If your home's valued at $144,000, what your property is getting taxed on is $119,720 based off of the market exclusion that the state has put in. That's for every residential home within the state of Minnesota up to, I think, a home valued at $430,000? $413,800. So the state did this in 2012 for property tax relief to the residential properties in town. Those of you that own commercial industrial business, you guys don't get that. Call your governor on that. So I touched on this once again a little bit earlier too about the market values and what we're seeing for increases over the years. This is just a graph of looking at our market value going back to 2019. The good thing is that the economy is well in Hutchinson, and we're seeing significant growth within market value within the community. So from 2007 to 2018, residential value went up 8.9% in town. Commercial industrial property went up 4.6%. Apartments went up 5.5% for a total value increase of 7.7% from 17 to 18, and this was on top of a 3.8% increase the previous year. And so you can see, especially with the graph up here, you can see the decline of the values in town, obviously during the recession period, and how we've actually gone up and surpassed that. That is the highest value that we have on record within the city of Hutchinson's history, is the value that we received this year. Once again, that's based off of property sales that are occurring within the community. And just to note, this is the 6th straight year that we've seen our market values increase. And I think during that period, this is the largest increase that we've seen, which is, once again, 7.7%. So now I'm going to get into more of the details behind the proposed tax levy and general fund budget for 2019. One of the things that I always like to share when we have this public hearing every year is I want to share the mission statement and then our core areas of focus, just to give you an idea of And this is what the council takes into consideration along with staff when we're creating the budget and the tax levy for the upcoming year. So, but our mission statement, which is written up on the board, is that the city of Hutchinson exists so that residents, businesses, property owners, and visitors are provided with quality services and programs that support a safe, healthy, sustainable, and business-friendly community with a small-town atmosphere for a cost of government similar to or less than comparable outstate Minnesota cities. I always tell the council every year we discuss it. To me, the budget is one of the biggest policy decisions a city council can make. It really drives the actions that we do not only the upcoming year, but for the years ahead of us. And so we try to accomplish that mission statement by focusing on 6 core areas that we call. That's providing good public safety, health and recreation, transportation, and that's multimodal transportation, economic development, environment, and good government. So these are things that we take into consideration when we're establishing and creating our budget and tax levy on a year-in and year-out basis. So as we get into more of the details for the tax levy for 2019, there are 2 components that the city council has direct control over. That is our general fund, and that's our debt funds. Our general fund is the day-to-day operations of the city. That's your snow plowing, that's your planning and zoning, that's your council, administration, police, park and rec. That is what we consider to be our general fund. So what's being proposed for our property tax levy increase in our general fund is a 4% increase for 2019. Now our debt funds, those are taxes that we collect to pay off our debt obligations, mainly for street improvements and other infrastructure improvements. We are not projecting a tax rate increase in our debt funds. That's expected to remain at a flat 0% for 2019. So when you take into account both of those tax levies, the general fund and the debt fund, we're looking at a total overall tax levy increase of 2.8%. Now you're going to see up there you have the EDA and the HRA levy. Both of those organizations have a separate board that establish both the budget and the tax levies. But the way that they are set up, the council has to give the final approval of any tax levy request. And for looking at from 18 to 19, the EDA has asked for a 7.7% increase, and the HRA is asking for an 8.6% increase, and that's regards to relation to market values, correct?
Right, set by state statute.
Yeah. So the overall total tax impact that a resident in Hutchinson is going to be looking at is a 3% increase for 2019.
Matt, could you explain what EDA and HRA for the public, what
EDA
those
is
are?
Economic Development Authority of Hutchinson, and the HRA is the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for Hutchinson.
Can you explain what they do?
Sure. Economic development, economic development's main job is to recruit and retain businesses into our community. They were heavily involved with the recruitment of Uponor to the location that they bought from HTI. They also built the business incubator that's out in the industrial park, and they've been heavily involved with the school district in their CTE program that was recently established. Kind of gives you a background on what they do.
Probably
Cobblestone?
Warrior Manufacturing.
Cobblestone?
Cobblestone too, as well. The HRA Housing and Redevelopment, they deal with, what's the best way to put it, Section 8 housing, low-income housing.
Yeah.
They're also looking to expand both affordable and workforce housing within the community.
Rental rehabilitation.
Yeah.
What do they do with the money?
Right.
Part of it is, as John noted, they have a rental rehab program that they do. They run Park Towers, which is over by Park Elementary. What's the other facility that they?
That's the only one they manage, yeah.
And then they also have some other housing programs that they offer to the community.
Low interest.
Isn't that partially federally funded?
Yes.
Okay, so how much of it is federally funded, how much of it is locally funded then? What are they doing with the money? Who's getting the rates?
This whole portion is the city's contribution, local funded. The federal comes in from a different pot of money.
I understand that. I
We
want
don't-
to know where the funds are going. What are they doing with the funds? Are they upgrading the homes? Are they, what do they do with the money?
These funds here are more operating expenses, to pay the salaries, pay for the maintenance of park towers up there. pay-
So somebody's getting an annual increase,
Yep.
is that correct?
There is a full-time HRA director, there is an assistant to the HRA director, and then there is maintenance staffs that are all part of what that portion of the city is paying
Right,
for.
so what is their annual increase that we're looking at here? Are they looking at a 7.7%
In personnel costs?
salary increase?
No.
No.
What are they looking at? Why is that not disclosed? I mean, all I'm seeing is general numbers. Those numbers can go anywhere.
Mhm.
And really, is it going to affect the people that it's supposed to go to? You know, if it's for housing and redevelopment, those are for lower income people, that money should be maintained for them?
Ma'am,
It doesn't-
ma'am, I'm on the HRA board. Maybe I can shed some light on this for you.
Yeah?
Now, like, the apartment houses downtown above the Main Street businesses, okay, what happened is that we gave them low-interest loans to upgrade those apartments. So that's where some of the money goes. Some of it goes to people who apply for low-income loans or, low-interest loans, so they can, like, put new windows in, upgrade their furnaces, and that's where most of the money goes to. And they pay it back by low-interest loans that the HRA supplies. And now they're just doing a program too, that if you live and work in Hutch, if you purchase a home, you can get a low-interest loan to upgrade the furnace or windows. So that's where most of that money goes to.
And if you would like a detailed line item statement for the HRA, we can get that for you.
Okay.
So, and I'd also encourage you to talk with Jean Ward. She is the director of the HRA. As I know, they have a separate board that runs and maintains.
Ward is their last name?
Ward, W-A-R-D, Jean.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know the percentage of the owners of these apartments and stuff that live outside of the city of Hutchinson versus inside of the city?
I don't have that information.
That would be something that Gene probably would have.
I guess the other thing I'd just point out is that, that if you're looking at the HRA levy, the 186.23, that is mostly pay and for the employees. Then Gene goes out and applies for grants or from DEED, the Department of
Employment and
Employment and
Economic
Economic, yeah. And federal programs. And so the monies for the rental rehab program, a lot of those come from those federal programs, or DEED would be a state program.
And our matches that the HRA will make us on those
Yeah.
programs as well. Yeah.
Is it still the city's philosophy to carry that debt load indefinitely, and that's the reason there's never a negative number on the debt levy?
I'll touch on that in a little bit. We've got our long-range debt management plan, so it'll be in. So talking about the debt levy, the 2.2 million, these are the debts that are. This is what that levy is being collected to pay off for those debts. Our current philosophy is to have that 2.2 million. I think we did increase that to, is that the 2.4, 2.6?
2.6
Eventually, that will start kicking in 2023. And so that, when we start talking about street improvements in town and the amount of projects that we want to do, that ties directly to this tax levy. tax levy comparisons over since roughly 2011. That just kind of gives you a graph on where we've been and where we've gone. Since 2011, the average property tax increase during that time period has been 1.8%. That's ticked up a little bit since 2015. That average has spiked up to 2.5%. That's what our average property tax levy increase has been over those last 8 years. So when you get your property tax bill in the mail, this is kind of a highlight of a breakdown of what those dollars are going to pay for. Roughly 39% is going to the city of Hutchinson, 31% is going to McLeod County, school districts at 27%. There's the EDA and the HRA levies, which are 1% or just under 1%. For comparison purposes, last year, the city's percentage was at 40.8%. The county was at 30.4%. The school district was at 26.8%. And then EDA and HRA remained the same. So some additional information on the proposed tax levy for 2019. This includes a 4th straight year of an increase in the general fund portion of that levy since 2011. The proposed 2009 tax levy includes a third straight year of a 0% increase to the debt fund portion of the levy since 2013. As I just noted, it's not expected to increase again until 2023. Compared to 2011, the city's total tax levy increase, so if you look at proposed 2019 compared to 2011, it's a 15.5% increase from 2011. As I noted, that's an average of about 1.8%. The 2019 city tax levy accounts for per capita tax of $515, up from about $503 in 2018. Looking at what makes up our general fund revenues, what's being proposed for 2019. The property taxes, that's the 4% increase, is the proposed tax levy increase for 2019. You'll notice up there other taxes, and what's that? That includes, the city has a lodging tax, and then there's a cable franchise tax that gets applied. And so when you rent a room at the hotel, there's a portion of that tax that gets collected and gets passed on to us. That actually then gets passed on to the Chamber of Commerce. That's where their funding comes from. License and permits, we're projecting about a 20% increase in 2019. Within that is a $70,000 increase in building permits. We're continuing to see an increase in people coming in and pulling permits. And our early indications show that increase is going to continue in 2019, and so we have that factored into our license and permits. The intergovernmental revenue, a slight increase of 1.5%. That includes things like our state aid that we get, whether it's local government aid or highway funds or police pension money. All of that goes into what's considered intergovernmental revenue. Charges for service, just a slight decrease in that. Charges for service include anything. You go, you pull a license at the DMV, that's what charges for services are. If you use any one of our recreational facilities and you have to pay a fee to use that gets counted for within the charges for service. Fines and forfeitures, those are pretty self-explanatory. We're projecting a slight decrease in that money. Miscellaneous revenue, a slight decrease in that. Then our transfers in, just a slight decrease in that. This transfers in a $2.49 million. That includes money from the utilities that we receive, the liquor store, Creekside, water, sewer. Any of that money that gets transferred into the general fund. This was also the location of where the hospital money was at. I think you're all familiar that the city sold their lease portion of the hospital. That annual payment was roughly $260,000 that has gone away. We collected that money up front. While that went away, we did see an increase in our Hutch utility payment of over $270,000. and that's reflected within the revenues for 2019. Just to touch briefly on local government aid, and just the history of what we received from the state. Going back to 2016, we're projected to see a slight increase in 19 of about $6,300. I will note we're still about $30,000 below the level that we were at in 2016. And so that goes back to
2006.
2006, I'm sorry. That goes back to the state budget cuts back then. And so they've slowly restored that LGA payment. For the public's knowledge, when we get that local government aid, roughly 46% of that, about 1.1 million, goes into the general fund that help funds our day-to-day operations. The remaining 54%, or 1.3 million, goes to our capital improvement fund. So that builds for things that helps pay for things like facility improvements, roads, bridges, trails. That all goes into what we call our capital equipment. Anything that's of a large expenditure is within our capital improvement fund.
Matt, earlier you said we're the third lowest LGA payment in all of outstate regional centers.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want our payment to be higher? So is third lowest not great?
Well, if you look at somebody like Albert Lee or somebody who has a similar size, they're getting, in some cases, so when I look at regional centers, they're anywhere from a size of 10,000 to about 20,000 in outstate Minnesota. So I think the low end payment is about $1 million in local government aid, up to about $6 million in local government aid. Now, that's obviously money that relieves the tax burden, but these are the variables that are used. You may recall one of the things that I noted is that we have the third highest income of the regional centers, which I would say that's a blessing for us, but it does have an impact on our local government aid.
Yeah,
Our housing stock is newer. than some of the
our
other
income
cities.
was 58, and I believe Bemidji is 38. So that's one of the reasons why Bemidji gets more than we do. And I think that holds true for Albert Lee too. They got older houses and lower income.
So these are the different variables that get used to calculate LGA. So I would say some of it is good news for us on why we're not getting a higher LGA payment, but that does put more pressure than on taxes. So some additional facts in the general fund on our revenues. As noted, the general fund includes a 4% tax levy increase. Property taxes account for roughly 39% of our general fund revenues. As I noted, it includes an increase of the transfer from Hutch Utilities in the amount of just over $270,000. One of the things that we did starting last year was that we had done some research with Hutch Utilities. Most municipal utilities don't pay property taxes. And so they pay what's called a pilot, which is a payment in lieu of taxes. For years, that pilot was at 2.75% of their operating revenues. As we went out into the market and we looked at what other cities were doing, we found out that we were, I would say, on the lower end of that percentage. Most were in the 4 to 4.5% range. And so we began starting, 2018 was the first year of a 3-year phase-in to bring that percentage from 2.75 up to 4.5%. And so this is year 2 of that phase-in. I think we're at 4%. And next year that will go up to 4.5%. So that's the increase in revenue from Hutch Utilities.
So they're increasing? They're
increasing their payment to the city, yes.
Okay.
But not their rates.
They're increasing, we don't have anything to do with the rates. They're increasing their payment to the city. Instead of paying property taxes, their pilot. So it's about 1.6 million, 1.7 million is what we get a year now from Hutch Utilities. The general fund also includes that decrease of $260,624. That's the removal of that hospital payment. And one of the other things that we've been doing for years is that a part of our health insurance plan, we have an HSA that the city contributes to. This is going a little bit into the weeds, but we used to be a self-insured insurance pool in Hutchinson, and that went away several years ago. But that left us with a pool of money that can only be used for health insurance or health purposes. And so for years, the city has been using that money to help pay for health benefits of its employees. Well, as you can guess, that money is going to eventually go away. So we are beginning to plan next year for the complete removal of that money. I think it's $125,000 a year that comes in our general fund from that. And so we decrease that by 28%. We're going to keep backing that off. So when it's completely gone, we're not faced with a $125,000 decision at one time. So we're doing some future planning within this budget as well. As I noted, it includes a 25.5% increase in building permit revenues. Most of our other revenue sources are remaining relatively flat. I noted that property taxes account for 39% of our general fund revenue. But to be fair to everything else, roughly 22% comes from charges for services. Another 19% comes from our transfers in. That's your Hutch Utilities, Liquor, Creekside. And then roughly 12% of our general fund revenue comes from intergovernmental revenue, which is LGA, police and fire aid, police pension aid. So as we look at the proposed general fund expenses for 2019, we're looking at a roughly 2.4% increase in city's wages and benefits. That includes performance increases and any costs related to workers' comp. Fortunately for us, after having a 14% increase in our health insurance rates last year, we're projecting a 0% increase for 2019. So we were able to negotiate that down, just obviously through the health of our workforce. Supplies, we're projecting a slight decrease in costs for 2019. Services and charges, that's things like our professional services. That's the money that we have, that we pay to Pioneerland to have the library here in town. That includes our utility costs. Just a slight increase of about $3,000 is projected for 2019. The miscellaneous expenses, you're seeing a 10% increase for that. That is to help pay for, we have what we call a fleet fund. It's all of our heavy equipment. We have a fund for that. Right now we budget $225,000 a year to help replace all of the equipment, all of our vehicles, mowers, snow blowers within the community. That number hasn't been touched since 2012. So it stayed at 225 since 2012. Obviously, costs have gone up since that time, and so we're not able to purchase and replace as many pieces of equipment. So the council has made a decision to increase that amount, $50,000 for 2019. Transfer out that $101,000. That's a 2% increase. That's the city's cost of the HATS facility. And then we're not expecting any additional changes in capital outlay costs for 2019. So general fund expenses, how do you break? No, that was kind of big picture. So where does that money actually go? Of that $13 million that we're spending within the general fund. Roughly 34%, or about $4.5 million, goes to public safety. That's the police department, the fire department, and building inspections, building and rental inspections. Another 15.7%, roughly $2.1 million, goes into our street and highway department. That does not include costs related to road improvements, and that comes out of another fund that I'll touch on a little bit. General government, that's administration, planning and zoning, DMV, legal, finance, accounts for roughly 25% of our general fund budget. That's about $3.3 million. And then culture and recreation, that's everything from the aquatic center to the ice arena to the event center to our park system. is roughly 23%, which is about 3 million. Those numbers have not significantly changed from 2018 to 2019. This is a history of our general fund budget. You'll notice a pretty significant increase over the last couple of years. I'm going to touch on the variation in these numbers. So from 2009, 2010, and 11, that's obviously the recession years that we faced, and during that time, the city reduced its staff by the equivalent of 14 full-time employees, and so that's where you see the decrease in costs there. Also during that same time, we had our LGA cut by over $268,000, so the city made adjustments to obviously its budget expenses during that time period. And you're going to notice there was a large increase from 2016 to 2017. That is when the aquatic center was built and came online. So that's roughly, I think, $400,000 is what our aquatic center budgets. For 2018, the city covered roughly $25,000 of that cost. So the rest of that was made up by revenues collected at the aquatic center. You notice another significant increase from 2017 to 2018. We had more employees last year. We added 2 more building inspectors to deal with the demand that we were getting from the public with the growth in the building. I believe we also added a full-time police officer, and we had to add some staff in the DMV to account for the state no longer allowing us to have to run that with 32 hours. They told us we had to go to 40. And so that's the significant increase from 13 to where we are today in 2019.
And then in 14 and 15 is when the hospital police officers, which we get reimbursed for that, but it's still a expenditure increase in the budget.
Some additional facts on the general fund expenses for 2019. Wages and benefits are expected to increase by over $210,000, which is about a 2.4% increase. Most of that is for performance and other annual adjustments. We have added some additional part-time seasonal hours within the parks department to have more coverage of our campground. It also includes an additional $50,000 in funding for, as I noted, for our fleet vehicle replacement fund. Wages and benefits account for 68% of our general fund expenses. That is by far the largest expense that we incur as a city. For comparison purposes, that was at 67.5% last year. So generally, we're right around that 68 to 70% of our expenses that would cover the costs of our staff. And some of the other increases are just inflation, other miscellaneous costs. The proposed 2019 budget is balanced between expenses and revenues, including that 2.8%.
So
property tax increase.
This consumer product index inflation is 2.1% right now.
Yeah, it depends which index you look at.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that low 2s.
So that is the city's general fund. That's our day-to-day expenses that we use to run the operation. I want to use some of the other time I have here to touch on some of our enterprise funds, so the public has some knowledge on how those are operating. That's our liquor store, Creekside, water sewer, storm sewer. And so between, you'll notice a lot of these would appear to be a negative number, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. We don't budget for depreciation, but for a financing standpoint, we have to show depreciation within our budget. But for the most part, the liquor store continues to do extremely well for the community. We're projecting a slight increase in revenue. Most of the increase in expenses in the liquor fund have to do with employee wages and the cost of product. You'll notice a pretty significant increase in compost of 18.5%. That is due to we've taken on a couple foods We've had a request from Cub Foods for our composting material, and so we've seen a large uptick in their need and demand, which is shown in the revenue and also in the compost. The refuge, that is our garbage service here in town, and that also includes some capital equipment out at Creekside. You'll see a slight decrease in water revenue. While we have new homes being built in town, and new commercial buildings being built in town, we are seeing our industrial users decrease the usage of water, and that's mainly one large customer in town who has their own private well. And they've gone away from using the city's water system to their private well, and that's where you see the significant decrease in our water revenue. Quite frankly, we've got a public that I would say is mindful of their water use in town. We don't see large peaks in water usage.
And if it ever smells like roast beef around town, you can figure out who that large business is. Yeast plant.
Yep, and then that obviously plays into effect. Our sewer rates are based off of our sewer revenue, and expenses are also based off of our water usage. Stormwater revenue, that is the monthly charge that you receive on your utility bill. That helps pay for the storm ponds that are located within the town, along with the storm sewer that's within the street infrastructure. They're projecting a slight rate increase of 3% for next year. And you'll notice that the increase in the expenditures are due to some capital improvements, and mainly the South Central Storm Retention Pond that's being built. And so that's the budget side of it. When we look at it from a cash flow and cash ending balance, we projected a loss within the liquor store. I can say this, in my years of being here, the liquor store has yet to lose profit. Compost cash flow continues to remain healthy, along with their ending cash balance. The refuge cash flow, that's our garbage fund. You see a negative balance in that, a projected cash flow for next year. That's because we're making some capital purchases. I believe there's a new street sweeper that comes out of that. Vacuum.
Not a street sweeper.
That's why you're here, backing up. So, and then both our cash flow, our sewer, and the storm, our water and our sewer funds continue to remain healthy with positive cash flows. Those of you that are obviously familiar with town, that is where your sales tax that's collected goes to. Half of that goes to the water fund. The other half goes to the sewer fund to help pay for the infrastructure that was built several years ago at both the water and sewer plant. That's set to sunset in 2026. So just a quick summary on our enterprise funds. Liquor Hutch, and Creekside continue to do well, and they'll contribute over $610,000 into our general fund in 2019. For comparison purposes, if that were to go away, we'd be looking at either a 12.4% tax levy increase or reduction in services to make up for that loss of revenue. There are no increases in garbage, water, and sewer rates proposed for 2019. Last time garbage rates were increased was in 2008, and the last time water and sewer rates were increased were in 2011. All enterprise funds continue to have healthy fund balances. There is a slight rate increase in our stormwater rates of 3%. So when you take into account Liquor Hutch, Creekside, the water, wastewater funds, roughly $730,000 gets transferred into the general fund from those funds for 2019. And when you add the roughly 1.7 million of Hutch utility money that we received, it's almost just over 2.4 million that comes in from enterprise funds into our general fund. One of the things that we are starting to plan for is that we're starting to see more capital needs due to the age of all of our cities are starting to increase. Water plants, 10, 12 years old. Wastewater plants, 13 years old. Creekside was built in 2001, 2002, and so we're just starting to see more needs to have to improve those facilities and keep those equipment that's out there. Next, I'm going to touch on the 2019 capital improvement plan. This is the fund that gets used to pay for our large expenditures in town. This is your facility improvements, your street improvements, and your utility improvements that take place. Every year we do, or every budget cycle, we do a 5-year, what we call capital improvement plan. And that's how the funds are going to lay out from 19 to 23. You'll see a pretty large payment in 19 and another one in 2020. And then you'll see it drop off significantly in 2021. On average, we spend about $8 million a year to help improve our facilities throughout town. Now, the 2020 takes into account the Main Street project that's coming into play, and along with some plans that we have on the future needs of the police station. And so that's where you see some of the larger expenses in 19 and 2020, along with receiving some grant money that need to be expensed in 19 as well for some of our street improvements. And I'll touch on what we're looking to focus on next year. So you're looking at roughly a 5-year CIP of about $53 million. And so where are we designating that money to go to? Roughly $25.5 million is going to our infrastructure. That's our streets. That is the utilities that are underground. Roughly $5 million to $6 million a year is what we designate towards to the streets and infrastructure within the city limits. Public safety is about $11 million. I will note about $10 million of that is for a new police station that we've factored into the 5-year CIP. That hasn't been finalized, it hasn't been approved, but we are budgeting for that. Roughly 19% goes to what we consider our enterprise fund, so that's improvements to Creekside, the refuge, the liquor store, the water plant, the sewer plant, and our storm sewer system. Public Works is just over $2.3 million. That includes improvements to the airport, cemetery, and that's where you'll see replacements for street vehicles and equipment. Roughly $2.3 million, about 4% of that is going to Park and Recreation, so that's improvements to the pool rec center, civic arena, event center, library, and then to our park system. And the general government's $1 million. That's administrative technology upgrades, and then improvements to the city center building. So where does that money come from to pay for all of that $53 million that we have budgeted that we have planned for over the next 5 years? For this 5-year plan, roughly just over $19 million is new debt. That's the amount of money that we're going to need to borrow to make those projects work. That includes the $2 million, $2.2 million that we have for infrastructure. We've also included debt in there for the police station. As I noted, it hasn't been finalized. We're still working on that plan, but we've got it in our budget for now. Enterprise funds, so the money that gets collected from your water fees, your sewer fees, the money that the liquor store collects, Creekside collects, some of that money goes to pay for the facility improvements throughout the community. And over the next 5 years, we've got that just under $12 million is going to that. We designate about $2 million a year of our property tax to go help pay for capital improvement projects, which is about roughly 20% of our overall levy. Special assessments, that's direct cost. So if you live on a street that's going to be improved, you're most likely going to be specially assessed for that project, and that's about $5.3 million over the next 5 years. And then we're always out there looking to get state grants, federal grants to help pay for a portion of our projects, which is roughly about 10% or about $5.26 million over the next 5 years. Then we have a couple of special fund reserves. We've got an agreement with the rural fire departments, and we've got some other cooperative agreements like with the school that help pay for some of our improvements. But to focus more just on what's planned for 2019, the upcoming year, we've got roughly, as we looked at that, $12.8 million of what's budgeted next year for capital improvements. $7.5 million is going to infrastructure. That includes the South Central Drainage Project, South Grid Road and Trail Project, Fifth Avenue, southwest, southeast is proposed to be replaced next year. We're working on Public Road for TDK in Uponor, and we're also looking at some LED light retrofits throughout the community. Another roughly $3 million is going to our enterprise fund, so that's for improvements to Creekside, for both facility and equipment, and then improvements to our water plant, sewer plant, wastewater plant, and stormwater system. Another $1.35 million is for public safety. I believe we budgeted $1 million next year for the police station. That may be to purchase land or to potentially purchase a building. Park and Rec is, we budget over $640,000. The biggest improvement that's planned for next year is a $350,000 upgrade to the North Park tennis courts. And there's I think a $200,000 repair at the library. Public Works over $170,000. That's for equipment, improvements to the cemetery, and then also includes street vehicle replacements. And then general government. We've got some interpretive signage and some city center upgrades are included within the 2019 CIP. So once again, just a summary of some of the major projects that we're planning for next year. That's the second half of the South Central Trunk Storm Sewer Project, South Grid Road, Fifth Avenue, Linden Avenue. We're looking at a significant compost turn at Creekside, some additional roads, and some park and rec improvements. So our debt management plan. Our target debt levy, this was set by policy from the council back in 2016, was a $2.6 million is what we want to borrow on a year-on, year-out basis to cover the capital needs of the community. After a 5% levy increase in 15 and a 1% increase in 16, we were budgeting a 0% increase for the third straight year. As I noted, it's not projected to go up again until 2023. One of the things that we just found out since we went out for interest rates on our most recent bonds, but interest rates are rising faster than expected, which is probably not surprising to some of us. But that will have an impact on our debt levy. And so one of the decisions the council is going to be faced with probably in the next year or two is, how are you going to account for that? Really, those rising interest rates are creating what we've calculated to be about a $2 million gap. So you're either going to have to decrease your capital expenditures by about $2 million, or you're going to have to look at raising your debt limit by about $2 million to account for those increased interest rates. That's a discussion we're going to have, but that's faced with us right now. So our current debt limit is $2.6 million. That allows us to do $1.9 million worth of projects. We have to take into account fees and other things that come with borrowing for money. As I noted, our interest rates are really impacting some of the, and we're going to have the council make some important decisions on where we go with that in the future. So to kind of go back and do a summary of this hearing tonight, we are projecting a 2.1% increase in general fund revenues. Within that 2.1% increase is a 4% general levy tax increase. That matches the 2.1% increase in general fund expenses. Most of that is related to employment costs. Then as I break down the tax levies, you see the 4% increase in the general levy, the 0% increase in the debt levy, for a total overall city tax impact of 2.8%. As I noted, the EDA and HRA, they have separate boards that establish those levies, but the council has to have final say on whether or not those get approved, and they've currently proposed a 7.7% increase and an 8.6% increase for a total tax levy impact to Hutchinson residents of 3%. So what's the biggest factor behind the levy increase? As I noted previously, general wage and benefit increases are expecting to cost us an additional $210,565 in 2019. We're seeing some increase in capital needs throughout the community, and we're also working now to stabilize future tax levy increases. As I noted, costs are going up for vehicle and fleet replacement, We've got funds that we're using to help pay for benefit costs that are going to go away. And so instead of dealing with a $125,000 impact at once or a $200,000 impact at once, we're starting to plan. Right now, I'd say roughly probably 1% of that 3% tax levy increase is dedicated for helping to hopefully stabilize any future needs for tax increases. A 1% levy increase is equal to just over 71,000 or over 49,000 in the general fund. So briefly, some additional information. There's no significant increases or cuts in staffing or changes in service within the proposed budget. Staffing costs and capital needs are the biggest driver of our budget. Fund balances continue to remain high, and the fiscal condition of the city is healthy. The state's budget forecast has a surplus, and the state's economy remains healthy, so there shouldn't be any fiscal restraints at the state that would impact the city. Some of us have been here before where all of a sudden in the year we were told we're getting a tax aid cut that we had to prepare for. We're not anticipating any of that for 2019. Home values are continuing to increase. Last year, our median home sale price was at about $153,000. Through October, it's at $168,500. So our home value prices, the sale prices, have increased by over $15,000 in 2018. This year alone has been our second heaviest permit year for building. The year that beat it was last year, but that included $40 million for a new high school. But through October of this year, we've taken in over $29 million in revenue for building permits to kind of give you an idea on the type of growth that we're seeing within town. Local economy is very healthy, and it's continuing to grow. Our October unemployment rate is at 2.3% in town, which is, we haven't seen anything like that in years. So really, next steps for this hearing tonight is to open it up for any additional questions from council members and the public. This is the purpose of this meeting. At the end of the day, the 5 elected officials sitting behind that table have to make decisions affecting the budget and the tax levy, and this is the purpose of this hearing tonight. Yes. Maybe just state your name and address for the record.
Okay, my name is Carol Johnson. My address is 550 Lakewood Drive, Southwest. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just have one question. Sure. With the amount of money that you said that you no longer are receiving from the hospital because it was paid up front. Yep. And so you're basically, it sounds to me like you're figuring it as no more money coming in. You've got this big money up front, and you're going to plan to use it in other ways.
Correct.
And you're going to basically tighten your belt in other ways and look at more increased taxes to offset that. Is that what I'm hearing?
That wasn't correct. No, I think we always are watching, how we're spending things, but and it was a coincidence how it worked out, but the money that we're not going to be receiving anymore from the hospital was actually offset by an increase from Hutch Utilities, which was already planned.
Partially, not totally, but partially.
Yeah, basically.
The hospital payment was $260.
Right.
Hutch utility payment is going up $270,000.
Oh, okay. So if the Hutch utility payment to you guys went up, and the amount that you were receiving from them has gone down, and then you got one big payment. So you didn't really say what you were going to do with that
With the hospital money?
Yeah, the hospital.
We have said it, actually, it was at a previous meeting earlier this year. We put $3 million aside for the future police department to address those needs. $500,000 was added to the general fund to increase the fund balance in that, and the remaining 2.5 was set aside for future capital needs.
Okay, but you didn't say that when you were saying these things, because you were saying that was a proposed, that was in your 5-year plan, and these were future costs that you were looking at for tax purposes, and you didn't say that you had already set that money aside.
Well, correct, but I also noted for our capital projects, all the various funds that it comes from. Some of it comes from state aid, some of it comes from taxes, some of it comes from general fund reserve, or not general fund reserve, but from fund balance reserve, some of it comes from state aid. All of that goes into our capital projects funds, and I can get you a copy of how each one of those.
Okay,
costs are broken
I'm
down.
just wondering how much,
That's a fair question.
how much it's going to affect our taxes.
Roughly, whatever the 2.5 million is going to help pay for future capital projects. So that's 2.5 million potentially that wasn't going to have to come from property taxes or other aspects of budgets.
Okay.
Where did you come up with, Pat Thursday, 836 Hillcrest Northeast? Where did you come up with the 4%? Was that your budget increase for your annual increases for salaries? The 4%?
The 4% property tax,
Yeah.
the general fund tax increase?
Yep.
That helped cover the cost of, so the 4% is roughly $195,000. Our wage increase cost is about $215,000. So that's covering.
So that's covering a built-in annual increase to your salaries, is that correct?
Yep, we have a performance-based system for salaries. So anyone can get anywhere from 0 to 6% increase based on their performance and based on where they're at in their market. Our pay structure is based off of the market rate. We go from anywhere from 80 to 120% of the market. So that determines, based off your performance, what your salary increase is going to be on a year-in, year-out basis. So it could be as low as 0, it could be as high as 6 or 7%.
But at the same time, it's not built in. Every year it's looked at. We've had years where we didn't provide an increase at all, in our market adjustment. So, again, we take into
Right, because I'm
account.
looking at other people, other salaries. There's many, many people who do not get that. So it's like, if the person who's not getting an increase is paying for someone else to get an increase, that doesn't sit well.
Well, that's-
And why is it greater than
The consumer
the
product.
consumer product?
It's actually, the 2% is basically what inflation is. It was a little bit confusing when Matt was talking about up to a 6% increase because salaries are capped. When you get to the top of the pay grade, you're not going to get a 6% increase.
I get it, but then you figure out another way to go something.
Well, the other concern, and Steve and I are on the wage committee, we went through this stuff, and one of the things we're doing is competing with other cities for employees. And I think the county found that if you didn't pay your dispatchers enough money, they trained with you for 6 months and disappeared. So then you had to hire a new person and have another person train them in. So it actually was costing the county more money. So I guess the logic was to be competitive on our pay scale. And we're competing against the Chaskas and the Chanhassens and the Buffaloes and stuff of the state that are nearby us, and we want to maintain quality employees, and we don't want our employees necessarily moving on. We'd like to keep them here.
Right.
We do periodic wage studies to make sure that we're within what employees should be paid, so that we don't have a lot of turnover, because that is expensive.
But not paying too much either.
Right, but then what, when you study, what's the percentage rate of retirees that move to Hutchinson? What percent are retired people who really cannot budget these kind of increases to their taxes? The other ones are young people, usually a two-income household that are strained already. So it's like, I'm looking at this, and, we're paying more in city tax than for our county. It should be underneath it.
Well,
County
we
has
we provide a lot more services for city residents than the county does. We have all the streets, we have police and fire, things like that. So that's not unusual that you're gonna see higher city taxes than the county tax. Because that's, you know, all the city programs come from here, so.
Oh, yeah, the water and sewer are very expensive.
Water and sewer's not included in our property taxes though, that's based off of rates.
Dave Sebesta, 225 Dale Street, Southwest. I think a thing that was brought up to me is one day is, you look at the city of Hutchinson, we're at about 14,500 people. The county are 15,000. The county is 37,000. Correct me if I'm wrong. When you look at the tax base and tax levy, we have less people to support a tax base than what the county has to support a tax base. So typically when you say we're paying more than the county, it's because we have less population than what the county has. So your levy to the people is less than what the city would be.
Yeah.
You're saying the county levy per individual is less?
Well, you have more people to spread your tax base out to. is all I'm
On
getting.
the county?
Yeah, on the county level. So when you come straight back down to what Hutchinson is, typically you have less people to pay whatever that levy or that need is. So I'd say it's a spread of taxes gets to be less per individual tax.
It's still
Taxpayer.
based on the budgets though too.
Yeah,
Lots of service.
right.
We're offering way more services.
Are there any other questions, yes?
Sorry, Morgan Baum, I have a stupid question, but Matt says there's no such thing. It's back on your where we stand, 925 Second Avenue Southwest. It's on your where we stand slide from earlier from here where it says that Hutchinson is at a 71.14% tax rate. So, but we're gonna go down to a 67. So how are we also going up? I just don't understand. So you're gonna have to help me out.
So,
That's a good question, though. A lot of people don't understand that, so.
so the property that you pay on your home is based off of the tax rate established by the city, by the county. If you own a commercial property, by the state, school district, all of those go into the property tax rate that your property is based off of. And so what happens is that we've got, the best way to do it is to say take a big barrel, and so what determines that tax rate of which then determines how much you pay, you take into account the city's budget and tax levy request, the expansion or potentially decrease of property value throughout the community, and you take into things like tax capacity. All those get put into a big barrel. And so depending on what each one of those entities do, that may expand or decrease. And so the easiest answer is that we are increasing our tax levy by 3%. 2.8% of the city, when you include the EDA and the HRA, is 3%. But value has grown to a level within this community that we're not increasing our rate past the growth of the value that's occurring. So that's causing your property tax levy to decrease because there's more property, more value within the city that tax levy can be spread out to. And that's how your tax rate is established for the city, county, state, school district. Clear as mud, right?
Yeah, so the bigger we get, the further this number's gonna go down.
Well, but it also, but budgets and tax levies play a part of that.
Okay.
Now,
Property,
now let's put this aside. If we didn't raise the property tax by 3%, that 67% is probably closer to 65 or 64%.
65.
But you also have to play in the fact, did your value grow? Because that will have an impact on your property tax potentially as well.
And I think that's because of the total tax capacity, that went up quite a bit this year, as Matt showed. And that went up higher than, our you know, the budget
The levy
piece of it, the levy increase. So that's why
I really wish there
tax
was
rate
any way
went
to
down.
find property taxes.
Now, if we had another recession and everything started to
I mean,
drop.
now the risk the council has, and we've talked about that, is the recession could kick in again, your values drop, and now your tax rate goes up significantly higher if you don't make adjustments to budgets and tax levies.
I mean, back to Morgan's question about why did the tax capacity go up, I think a lot of it goes back to the multipliers that you talked about. So the multiplier for farmland is 0.25. That's got the lowest, well, unless it's a nonprofit or a church or something, which is 0. Then the residential property is multiplied times 1, but you have this credit, basically a third of the value of the house is eliminated from that. And then if you have a commercial property, commercial industrial up to 1.5 million, I think is the number. That multiplier is 1.5, and if it's commercial industrial property over $2 million, that multiplier is 2. So the more $2 million commercial industrial properties you can have in your town, they're paying the bulk of the property taxes, and that translates into your residential property tax being lower. That's one of the reasons when we compare ourselves to Alexandria or Albert Lee or Owatonna or in any of these places, that their rate is lower than ours because they have so much more commercial industrial than we do. If that I don't know if that gets into the weeds too much, but
I have one more question. The homestead thing. I know it's done by the state, but it's confusing to me because where you would think that when your house value rises, that the homestead would come off of that and decrease the amount, but it actually is just the opposite. That if they raise the value of your house, the amount of homestead that is you would think would decrease goes. The homestead,
Your exclusion decreases.
your exclusion
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
decreases. So if you have a cheap house, you get a great big exclusion, and if you have a more expensive house, you get no exclusion.
Yep.
So that doesn't make any sense to me, and I've never lived in any state where they actually did it that way. It was just the opposite. So this is confusing to me. Because, I lived in Alaska, I lived in Minnesota, I lived in North Dakota, I lived in New York, and it was all just the opposite, where if you had a higher value, they gave you a greater percentage exclusion based on the percentage of what your house was. But this state does it the strangest way, where you live in a cheap house, and you get the biggest exclusion, so you pay almost no taxes.
I think it's just a way to target some of the tax relief to lower income people. I think that's really the basis behind it. And, through the property tax piece. It's a form of property tax relief, so.
which local
If you
government
agree it or
also-
not, again, that's a question you can ask your state legislators. I did want to mention something about the HRA since, we had a question about that. I was looking, through their annual report from this year as well as, the budget itself. Yeah, there's wage and benefit increases in that, just like, other city employees. But they also had a large increase of about $11,000 that went towards project funding, which was for a grant, the local match piece, for a loan for affordability gap funding for single-family housing, for workforce housing. That grant they got was $125,000. So for that $20,000 local contribution, we received an additional $125,000. As the mayor had mentioned earlier, they had a downtown rental rehab program that they administered, and that grant was worth almost $670,000. So the HRA is managing all these different programs. They have single-family improvement programs, owner-occupied loans, streamlined grant program, rehabilitation program, fix-up loan and community fix-up loan program, and some deferred loan programs. And all that is, you know, they're trying to help keep our housing stock in Hutchinson at a quality level. And I think you see that for the most part. We don't have areas in town where housing is really substandard like you might see in other communities. And the HRA is the reason for that. And so our budget, as Matt mentioned, predominantly helps to pay for the operational costs of the program itself. But just like the EDA, and they turn around and look for other ways, other grant programs, other ways to benefit and turn around that funding, and really leverage the local funding to bring in a lot more funding. So that helps it all. I think this year they had about $475,000 worth of grants they're working with. So.
You know, I'll have one more thing I know, and as I shared, wages and benefits are the largest cost to the city. There is a wage committee at the city. They do analyze where do we fit from a competitive standpoint. What are the average increases that are being seen for public sector? Those are all things that get analyzed and go into making the decision that the council has made in the formation of their pay system here at the city. So, I mean, like I said, I know that maybe doesn't answer some questions, but it's not something that doesn't get looked at and analyzed on a year in and year out basis. And there's policy decisions that end up getting made by the city council regarding those aspects of it.
I mean, kind of a ballpark number, when we hire a police officer, when we added the 21st police officer, that basically is $100,000 a year that it costs. And it may be, depending on who the employee, it may be a little bit more, it may be a little less. But
Any other questions, comments?
Couple things I'd encourage those of you that showed up tonight. First off, thank you. This is my 4th one here, and this is the largest crowd that we had, so I appreciate it. I would encourage you, though, like I said, this was the 5th public meeting we've had on our budget, and the average attendance that we have is 0. Oh, I should say 1. The newspaper is usually there, and so a lot of these things we get in a lot more details at some of these workshops, and I will also say this too, and come January, this is their annual budget book that gets published, and it goes on our website, and it goes into details about every fund. But with that being said, my office is always open, always welcome. Andy and I will gladly sit down. Even before we get to truth and taxation here, we've got detailed spreadsheets that we can easily give you, where you can take a look at in more detail where the money is being spent, where the increases are from a line item perspective for every single one of the departments within the city. I would just encourage your participation in the future. This will, like I said, this will be posted on our website, but there are hard copies that we can make for you that goes into all the details regarding the budget. There's still time for you to have conversations with your elected officials. There'll be discussions at the next council meeting, which is December 11th, and the final budgets and the levies will be considered and adopted at the December 27th city council meeting. Council meetings start at 5:30 and held in these exact same chambers.
I think Melissa gave you more handouts.
Yeah, Melissa,
Oh.
I think, yeah, so.
If you didn't get a copy of my presentation tonight, there's a copy available. And I said, if you have any more specific detail questions, feel free to call me or email me and I can get that to you.
And if you want an autographed copy, just stop and see me after.
You should mention too, you mentioned the budget book, but each of the departments has an annual report that they put out that goes into a lot of the details of the things that they did during the prior year, as well as their goals for the upcoming year. And those are all available also. Most of them are posted online. If they're not, you could get a copy from down here too. So that'd be the HRA, EDA, fire, police.
Public Works.
Public Works is a big one, which includes water, sewer, stormwater, park and rec. So a lot of good information available. That answer your question?
Questions?
You asked the question about the debt levy. Did you get your question answered on that?
Jim Reddicup, 326 Circle Drive. My question's understood. I don't really have a question. It's just if the council is soliciting opinions. The debt management plan is really just a buy now, pay later. So we as a generation are experiencing these benefits of these capital improvements that we're spending on now. And as an individual, you can do that for 30 years for your house, but as a city, it should be, hopefully the city's here 100 years from now. And I just see us taking benefits now for ourselves and putting it on future generations with the way we're treating the debt management plan. I understand everybody else, every other city in the state does it, but I would just encourage, or my opinion would be, we'd have more discipline and not buy now, pay later, but try and get that debt management plan to decrease. Over the course of 100 years, we all know interest rates go way up and down. We've got this plan now at historically low interest rates, so it makes great sense. But 20, 30 years from now, it could really be hurting this community. So that's my opinion.
A couple things I'll just note. You're right, we had some great interest years and we were able to do a lot more projects with that amount. When it comes to street infrastructure, none of our debts go longer than 15 years. That's just more information, just so you have knowledge on that. So.
Yeah, we
The
do
way it's-
1.9 million a year in street work.
And the way it's kind of set up is each year one drops off, then we fill back in. So we try to level it off, and those expenses aren't going to go away. I mean, there's always going to be the next road that has to be worked on, and so it's a way to try to manage it in a more sustainable way, and but still be able to provide the services and that people expect to. So, but I think your point is well made.
I think we all look at the infrastructure and everything else to make sure that what we're doing is going to benefit people down generations to come, my grandkids and their grandkids, and I mean down. So I think we always look at that to make sure that we are looking towards the future. So,
And to your point about interest rates, I think 16 we did 1.9 million at 1.65%. In 17, I think it was 2.35%. This year it was 3.25, 3.1, 3.5. So, but it sounds like the Fed's going to raise an interest rate.
We couldn't get our bond agency to guarantee us 1.65 for the foreseeable future for some reason, but we attempted. So, Mayor and Council, if there's no more questions or comments, you're free to close your public hearing.
Motion to close the hearing.
I'll second.
motion by Steve, second by Chad, to close the public hearing. All in favor?